Before we begin, slow down for a moment and really listen, because this is not a story meant to entertain you for a few seconds. This is the kind of story that quietly sits in your mind long after the video ends. You're watching my voice of stories, and if you believe stories can change the way we see ourselves and the world around us, subscribe and stay with me, because some lessons are only understood through stories. He woke up early every morning, not driven by ambition or excitement, but because his mind refused to rest. Even in sleep, he felt the weight of unfinished thoughts. The room around him felt small and familiar, the kind of room that had seen the same version of him for years, unchanged, uncelebrated, unnoticed. He checked his phone out of habit, not hope. No messages, no missed calls, just the time staring back at him, reminding him that another day had already started without asking how he felt about it. He followed the same routine, got ready, stepped outside, blended into the crowd of people all heading somewhere with purpose, or at least pretending they had one. At work, he did what was expected of him. Nothing more, nothing less. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he reacted, not because he lacked thoughts, but because experience had taught him that his words rarely changed anything. Conversations happened around him, plans were made without him, opinions were shared confidently by others, while he stayed quiet, carrying ideas that never found a voice. And every time he chose silence, a small part of him accepted it as normal. By the time the day ended, exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was mental, the kind that comes from constantly holding yourself back, from knowing you were capable of more, but convincing yourself that now is not the right time. At night, when everything finally slowed down, when there were no expectations to meet and no roles to play, his thoughts became honest. He questioned his own choices, his own courage, wondering when he started shrinking himself to fit into places that never truly valued him. He wasn't angry at the world, he wasn't blaming anyone. Deep down, he knew the truth was uncomfortable. The truth was that he had slowly trained himself to stay invisible, believing that being unnoticed was safer than being judged. And without realizing it, he had been living days that looked full on the outside, but felt empty on the inside. The next morning didn't feel special, nothing magical had changed overnight, but something inside him felt slightly heavier, as if his thoughts had decided they would no longer stay quiet. He moved through his routine again, yet this time he noticed things he usually ignored. The way people spoke with confidence even when they weren't sure, the way decisions were made by those who simply dared to speak first, and the way silence slowly erased people from the room, including him. During a meeting, as voices overlapped and ideas flew around, he felt that familiar hesitation rise inside him, that moment where his mind raced faster than his mouth, where he calculated every possible outcome of speaking up, being ignored, being misunderstood, being judged. And as usual, silence seemed like the safest option, so he stayed quiet, nodding along, letting the moment pass. But this time, the silence didn't settle easily. It followed him. It sat with him long after the meeting ended, reminding him that every time he chose comfort over courage, he paid for it with regret. Later that day, he overheard someone complain about feeling stuck, about feeling unseen, and for a brief second, it felt like they were describing his own life, except they said it out loud. And that realization hit him harder than any insult ever could, because he understood that the difference between them wasn't talent or luck, it was permission, permission to take space, permission to exist without apology. That evening, as he walked back home, surrounded by strangers rushing past him, he felt smaller than ever, not because the world was big, but because he had made himself small for too long. He thought about the years he had spent waiting for the right moment, the right confidence, the right version of himself, and how quietly those years had slipped by while he kept telling himself tomorrow would be different. At home, he sat alone with his thoughts. No distractions, no noise. And for the first time, he admitted something he had avoided for years. No one was coming to give him permission. No one was going to suddenly notice him and pull him forward. If his life was going to change, it wouldn't be because the world became kinder. It would be because he finally decided to stop hiding. And that realization didn't feel empowering at first. It felt terrifying, because choosing change meant taking responsibility, and responsibility meant there would be no one else to blame if he failed. The following days tested him in ways he wasn't prepared for, not with dramatic failures or public humiliation, but with quiet moments where he had to choose between his old habits and the uncomfortable truth he had accepted. Every time he felt the urge to stay silent, his mind replayed that realization, reminding him that silence had never protected him, it had only delayed his life. At work, he began to speak, not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly, and the first few times his voice felt unfamiliar to his own ears, slightly shaky, slightly unsure, yet real. Some people listened, some didn't, and that itself was a lesson. He understood that being heard was never guaranteed, but being invisible was a choice he had been making for years. Mistakes happened, awkward pauses happened, moments of doubt returned, but something inside him refused to let those moments define him again. He stopped replaying every conversation in his head, stopped punishing himself for not being flawless, and slowly learned that confidence isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward despite it. Outside of work, he started investing time in himself, learning skills that once felt intimidating, reading, practicing, failing quietly, improving slowly. Nights were still long, but they no longer felt empty. They felt intentional, like each small effort was a brick placed toward a future he could finally see forming. People around him didn't suddenly change their behavior, praise didn't arrive, recognition didn't come knocking, but something far more important began to grow: self-respect. The kind that doesn't depend on approval, the kind that allows you to stand alone without feeling lost. And with every passing day, he noticed that the world hadn't become less intimidating. He had simply stopped shrinking himself to survive in it. And that realization, more than any success or validation, made him feel alive for the first time in years. As weeks turned into months, he began to notice changes that didn't announce themselves loudly, but revealed their presence in subtle ways. The way he walked into a room without immediately searching for a corner to disappear into. The way he held eye contact a little longer. The way his thoughts felt clearer because he no longer fought them. He accepted them, shaped them, and spoke them when it mattered. There were days when the old fear returned unexpectedly, days when one careless comment or one cold reaction made him question everything again. But this time he didn't retreat. He paused, reflected, and moved forward anyway, understanding that growth was never a straight line. It was a series of decisions made repeatedly, even when motivation was gone. He realized that confidence wasn't built in moments of success, it was built in moments of resistance, when the easier option was to stay quiet and the harder one was to speak, when the familiar path was to shrink and the unfamiliar one was to stand firm. Slowly, people began to respond differently, not because he demanded attention, but because he carried himself differently. His words had weight now, not because they were perfect, but because they came from someone who believed he deserved to be heard. Outside, the world remained just as competitive, just as indifferent, but inside, something had settled, a calm certainty that he no longer needed validation to move forward, that even if no one applauded his efforts, he would continue, because quitting on himself was no longer an option. One evening, as he sat alone after a long day, he reflected on how far he had come, not in terms of achievements or recognition, but in courage. And he understood that the real transformation wasn't visible to others. It was internal, irreversible, and deeply personal. He had crossed a line he could never go back from, the line between waiting for life to happen and actively participating in it.
There was no single day he could point to and say, this is when everything changed. Because real change doesn't arrive with a timestamp. It settles slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you are no longer the same person who once felt small in every room. He still faced uncertainty, still had moments where doubt knocked on his door, but now doubt no longer lived inside him. It was just a visitor, and he had learned not to let it stay. He understood that life would never be fair, that effort doesn't always get rewarded immediately, and that being seen by the world is never guaranteed, but being honest with yourself is. And that honesty had become his strength. He stopped chasing approval, stopped measuring himself against people who were running different races, and instead focused on showing up fully as himself, even on days when confidence felt low, even on days when progress felt invisible. Over time, that consistency shaped him into someone steady, someone grounded, someone who no longer needed noise to feel important. One quiet morning, as he looked at his reflection, he didn't see success or failure staring back at him. He saw someone who had stopped running from his own potential, someone who had chosen responsibility over comfort, courage over convenience, and growth over excuses. Life hadn't become easier, the world hadn't slowed down, but he had finally learned how to stand firm within it. And that was the moment he understood the truth most people never realize. You don't need the world to believe in you for your life to change. You need to stop betraying yourself, because the day you do that, everything else slowly starts to fall into place. If this story made you pause for a second, if it felt uncomfortably real, then this channel is for you. Because these stories are not made to entertain, they are made to wake something up inside you. This is my voice of stories, and every story here speaks to the part of you that the world never sees. Subscribe now, not for notifications, not for numbers, but because the next story might arrive exactly when you need it the most.